بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So today is lesson number 34 in our series on the book Al-Uboodiyyah by Shaykh al-Islam ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah with the commentary of Shaykh Salih al-Fawzan. And in the previous lesson and the lesson before that, we were basically speaking about the necessity of worship and assistance in that worship for the heart. So the heart is in need of two things. It is in need of worship of Allah Azza wa Jal. It was created like that. And in addition to that, it also needs assistance and aid from Allah Azza wa Jal. And so all of this is found in the statement of Allah Azza wa Jal, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. Right? So this is something that the whole of mankind is in need of. Right? This sentence, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. You alone do we worship, and from you alone do we seek assistance. And so in the last lesson, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he discussed a scenario or a situation which is that because obviously there are different people who have different levels, right? So he gave us the scenario of a person who Allah Azza wa Jal can aid him in acquiring all of the things that he loves and desires and wants from the worldly affairs, right? So for example, he's got, wealth and, whatever else he has. But he has not acquired or attained that worship, which he ought to be pursuing and seeking. And instead, he's distracted with these other things, and Allah aids him in those things. So this type of person who is in this type of situation, then he hasn't really truly actualized the statement La ilaha illallah. He hasn't actualized Tawheed. He hasn't actualized, servitude to Allah. And clearly he has deficiencies. And these deficiencies in all of this is going to lead him to trouble, lead him to harm, lead him to punishment, and things of that nature, right? So, in other words, that amongst mankind there will be found people who are basically fit this description, right? And that's what we discussed in the previous lesson. And today we're going to continue. And here Ibn Taymiyyah mentions another scenario that we're going to discuss. So we will read the text and we'll come back to it inshallah. So he now says, وَلَوْ سَعَى فِي هَذَا الْمَطْلُوبِ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ مُسْتَعِينًا بِاللَّهِ مُتَوَكِّلًا عَلَيْهِ مُفْتَقِرًا إِلَيْهِ فِي حُصُولِهِ لَمْ يَحْصُلْ لَهُ. So if a person was to strive in trying to worship Allah, but he does not seek aid from Allah, relying upon Allah, being in need of Allah in achieving this objective, then he will not achieve it, right? In other words, now, so remember, in the last lesson, we were speaking about a person who, he's not really seeking to worship Allah, he's more interested in the worldly things, and Allah aids him in achieving those things, but he himself is not really desiring and wanting to worship Allah, right? And so this deficiency, trying to be in servitude to Allah, even though the worldly affairs, they're being fulfilled for him, Allah is aiding him, and right, this person will receive, punishment and loss and ruin. But here we have a different situation. Here we have a situation where a person is wanting to worship Allah, he strives, But he is not at the same time seeking aid from Allah, not relying upon Allah, not feeling that he is in need of Allah, of his help and assistance to help him reach his goal, right? So this person will not achieve that goal, right? Because remember, we said, إِيَّاكَ نَعْبُدُ وَإِيَّاكَ نَسْتَعِينُ. You alone do we worship, and from you alone do we seek aid. So here, Ibn Taymiyyah then says, فَإِنَّهُ مَا شَاءَ اللَّهُ كَانَ, because whatever Allah wills will occur, وَمَا لَمْ يَشَأْ لَمْ يَكُنْ, and whatever he does not will not occur. فهو مفتقر إلى الله من حيث هو المطلوب والمحبوب المراد المعبود. Because Allah is the one who this person is in need of, because Allah is the one who is sought, the one who is the loved one, the one who is desired, the one who is worshipped. So he is in need of Allah from that angle, and also from the angle وَمِنْ حَيْثُ هُوَ الْمَسْئُولُ الْمُسْتَعَانُ بِهِ الْمُتَوَكَّلُ عَلَيْهِ, and also from the angle that Allah is the one who you seek aid from, and who you depend and rely upon, right? And he is your ilah, he is the one that you worship, there is no ilah besides him, and he is your Lord, there is no Lord for you besides him. So here then, in this paragraph, Ibn Taymiyyah has highlighted to us another scenario for a person, which is the one who embarks on trying to worship Allah Azza wa Jal, and he obviously seeks Allah and wants to worship Allah and wants servitude, but he does not feel in himself the need for that reliance and to seek aid from Allah. He's basically lacking that element of it, right? And so here, he will not achieve his objective. So here Shaykh al-Fawzan, he comments upon this, and he says that if a servant wanted to worship Allah, but he doesn't seek aid from Allah, then he will not arrive at his goal, because he is not being aided upon his worship, and Allah will not make things easy for him, facilitate things for him, strengthen him, and keep putting in him the desire to worship Allah, right? So because these things are absent, because he's not seeking aid from Allah, then obviously he will not achieve his goal. And also he says, right, so that's the second situation, right? So understand all of these possibilities, right? Because people can fall into different possibilities. The first one we said, someone who is not really interested, he's just pursuing the world, pursuing his desires, and it just so happens from Allah's decree that he receives those goals, ambitions, or whatever it might be, and Allah aids him in that as well. And that's why sometimes when you think, and you sometimes as a Muslim, as a believer, you think and you look at other people, and you look at the kuffar, and you look at the mushrikeen, and you see how easy it is for them to amass wealth and to just generally be successful, and everything seems to fall in place for them and whatever else. Well, this is from the decree of Allah Azza wa Jal. He's just aids certain people to establish the proof upon them, and others he maybe withholds from them to force them to struggle and to strive and to undergo hardship as a means of aiding them and keeping them being in need of Allah Azza wa Jal. Some people thrive in poverty, like in the sense of in their ibadah. So long as they remain in poverty, they will be strong in their iman. But as soon as you give them some affluence, they will perish and they'll be ruined. As soon as affluence comes to them, all the desire, the raghbah for worship and for striving, whatever, that's now gone. They will just spiral downwards and they will perish in that affluence. Right? So some people, Allah Azza wa Jal, He just, keeps them in that. And other people, for them, the affluence is basically a trial and a means of, establishing the hujjah upon them, to prove that they were ungrateful, so that, whatever Allah has decreed for them in the hereafter, it can be fulfilled, with justice. So in other words, the first category that we discussed last week is a person who doesn't have any desire to worship Allah, right? But his wants, his desires are nevertheless still being fulfilled. He's being aided by Allah in those affairs. This, when you look among the people, you'll find people who are like that. Right? They're not really practicing, or it's just like on the edge, really. But they just seem to be so successful. Everything's going good for them, the career, wealth, possessions, they're happy apparently and everything else, but they don't have any uboodiyyah, servitude to Allah Azza wa Jal. Then you have some people who seek it, but they don't seek aid from Allah Azza wa Jal, in that they don't have that feeling of reliance, they feel that they don't need it. And in fact, this you find among like the Sufis as well. They don't believe that you take the means because it means, we discussed this previously in some of the lessons, if you remember back, where they don't feel the need to rely upon Allah because it's, for whatever reason that we discussed back then. So this is another category of person. This person will never achieve the objective. He will not be aided in that. And then you also have people who, when they seek aid, they do it from other than Allah, right? So this is different from the second person. The second person is one who, he pursues Allah, wants to be in servitude, but is not really seeking aid from Allah Azza wa Jal, feeling the need that he actually is in need of Allah and needs to rely upon Allah, trying to be self-sufficient and trying to, find. This third person here, which Shaykh al-Fawzan mentions here, indicates in the footnote, is that, a person, he will turn to other than Allah, and thinking that he will be benefited by that person. And this goes back to what we discussed again previously, previous lessons. Like sometimes you have people, they have an attachment to other people because they find that they will benefit them in something or repel harm from them. This you find amongst the kings or the rulers, or they depend upon their ministers, and they rely upon them, or they need them to maintain their position. This happens in the worldly relationships and worldly interactions. So such a person who turns to other than Allah, then this person will be led to ruin. He will not be benefited by that person. As Shaykh al-Fawzan says, "Man iltafata ila ghayrillah wa dhanna annahu yanfa'uhu." Whoever turns to other than Allah and thinks or believes that he will benefit him, وَأَنَّهُ يَدْفَعُ عَنْهُ الضَّرَرَ, and that he will repel hardship from him, فَإِنَّ هَذَا الْغَيْرِ لَنْ يَنْفَعَهُ وَإِنَّمَا يَكُونُ حَسْرَةً عَلَيْهِ. This other person will not benefit him. He is just going to be a ruin upon him. And for that reason, وَلِذَلِكَ الْمُسْلِمُ لَا يُحِبُّ إِلَّا لِلَّهِ وَلَا يَبْغُضُ إِلَّا لِلَّهِ ولا يوالي إلا في الله ولا يعادي إلا في الله ولا يتوكل إلا على الله. So he says, for this reason a Muslim does not love except for the sake of Allah, does not hate except for the sake of Allah, does not show loyalty except for the sake of Allah, does not show disloyalty or enmity except for the sake of Allah, and does not depend upon anyone except Allah. So if you look at this sentence here, really everything in your life comes back down to these issues here, right? If you want to have true servitude to Allah, and you want all of your affairs to be put in order, and if you want all of your affairs to be set aright, right? This is what it ultimately all boils. It starts from this point here, that you love only for the sake of Allah, that you hate only for the sake of Allah, that your loyalties to people, to whoever you show loyalty to, is only for the sake of Allah, your disloyalty is only for the sake of Allah, and your reliance is only upon Allah. If you start off on this point here, then obviously this will put you in servitude to Allah. That will lead you to contentment and tranquility, and all the problems in your life will disappear. Right? This is where it all starts from this point here. If you correct this thing, which obviously begins in the heart, then everything else surrounding you will be put aright. And then Shaykh al-Fawzan says, فَلَا غِنَى بِالْعَبْدِ عَنِ اللَّهِ سُبْحَانَهُ وَتَعَالَى no servant can ever be free of need from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَا يُعِينُهُ عَلَى طَاعَتِهِ وَعِبَادَتِهِ إِلَّا اللَّهُ جَلَّ وَعَلَى. No one can aid him in his obedience and worship except Allah, the lofty and majestic. So, coming back to the speech of Ibn Taymiyyah now, Ibn Taymiyyah then continues and he says, وَلَا تَتِمُّ عُبُودِيَّتُهُ لِلَّهِ إِلَّا بِهَذَيْنِ. The servitude of a person to Allah can never ever be perfected or completed except by these two things. Right? What are these two things? Is that he worships Allah, he loves Allah alone, and he seeks aid only from Allah alone. Right? This is how complete servitude is to Allah Azza wa Jal. That you love Allah and worship Him alone, and that you seek aid from Him alone. So then he says, فَمَتَى كَانَ يُحِبُّ غَيْرَ اللَّهِ لِذَاتِهِ أَوْ يَلْتَفِتْ إِلَى غَيْرِ اللَّهِ أنه يعينه كان عبدا لما أحبه وعبدا لما رجاه بحسب حبه له ورجائه إياه. So he says, when you have a person who loves other than Allah, who loves something besides Allah in and of itself, and he turns to other than Allah seeking that thing's aid, then he is a worshipper of that thing. He's a worshipper of the thing that he loves, and he's a worshipper of the thing that he hopes in, and a worshipper of that thing to the extent of his love and his hope in that thing. So here what Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah is pointing out is conversely now, I guess this is another scenario, a person who combines all of these things, he doesn't seek servitude to Allah, and he turns to other than Allah to aid him in whatever, then he is simply a slave. He is simply a slave to that thing or those things, to the extent that he loves that thing or those things, and he hopes in that thing or those things to achieve his objectives. And then, in contrast to all of these, we have a fourth person then, وَإِذَا لَمْ يُحِبْ لِذَاتِهِ إِلَّا اللَّهِ وَكُلَّمَا أَحَبَّ سِوَاهُ فَإِنَّمَا أَحَبَّهُ لَهُ وَلَمْ يَرْجُ قَطٌّ شَيْئًا إِلَّا اللَّهِ وَإِذَا فَعَلَ مَا فَعَلَ مِنَ الْأَسْبَابِ أَوْ حَصَّلَ ما حصل منها كان مشاهدا أن الله هو الذي خلقها وقدرها. It's a long sentence, let me read all of it and I'll come back to it. He continues, وَأَنَّ كُلَّ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ فَاللَّهُ رَبُّهُ وَمَلِيكُهُ وَخَالِقُهُ وهو مفتقر إليه كان قد حصل له من تمام عبوديته لله بحسب ما قسم له من ذلك. Alright, so in all of this sentence I've just read, basically here now we are speaking about the perfect slave, the perfect abd of Allah Azza wa Jal, and what he brings together of qualities, right? So this is the one who, he does not love anything for its own sake, except Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? The only thing he loves ultimately for its own sake is Allah Azza wa Jal. And if he loves anything or anyone besides Allah, then he loves it only for the sake of Allah, following on from the love of Allah. Right? And when he does any deed, when he takes any means, when he takes any of the asbab, or when he acquires anything from the things that he seeks, he knows that it is Allah who created the means, He created the causes, and He created the effects. Right? So in other words, all of the worldly things that he achieves and acquires that come to him, and likewise even the religious things that he achieves and acquires. So when he achieves and acquires, piety and righteousness and whatever, how did he acquire these things? He acquired them by way of the means that Allah has legislated, right? So he acquired that by virtue of what Allah has legislated. And when he acquires things in the worldly sense, material possessions and the worldly benefits, he's only acquired them by way of means and causes and effects that Allah has created for his servants. He didn't earn them independently of anything, independently of what Allah has put in terms of causes, meaning that there's no basis for him to start thinking that, well, this is my achievement. This is my achievement. I got this, this wealth or whatever because of my skill and my intelligence and my this and my that. Right? So he's not thinking like that, right? This person is thinking, as Ibn Taymiyyah says, he says that if he adopts any of the ways and means that Allah has put in his creation, and he acquires things on account of that, then he is a witness, and he bears witness that Allah is the one who created these means and decreed them upon his servants, and that everything which happens, which is in the heavens and the earth, then it is Allah who is its Lord, its owner, its creator, and that he, meaning the servant, is the one who is in need of Allah. Then if he fulfills all of these descriptions that we've just mentioned here in this paragraph, this is the one who has now completed that ubudiyyah. He has now achieved complete servitude to Allah, obviously to the degree and extent that Allah has apportioned for him. Right? Now this varies from every person, obviously. Each person which achieves a different level of ubudiyyah based upon these qualities that he possesses, or the extent to which he possesses these qualities. Right? So this is now like, the perfect person, so to speak. The one who loves Allah, more than anything else. And if he loves anything besides Allah, it's only because, he loves it for the sake of Allah. Right? So, like for example, if he loves a certain food, well, it's because it gives him delight and it makes him grateful to Allah and it allows him to sustain himself and worship Allah. So he loves it not as a thing in and of itself, but as a thing for the sake of Allah. See the difference here between the way this abd, how he thinks about things, and how we just have a regular person who just doesn't think about things, right? A person who is an abd, who is in servitude to Allah, the way he doesn't love a thing in and of itself for its own sake, but it's actually for the sake of Allah. So for example, you have one person, he might, let's say for argument's sake, he has a food that really delights him and pleases him, and all it is for him is just taste and pleasure, and basically that's it. That's the limit of his thinking. It stops at that point. Right? Oh, this is delicious, and and that's the limit of where his thought ends, right? But then you have the type of person described here. So here, obviously, this person is being put to trial with the love of other things besides Allah, in a way that could mean a deficiency in his servitude. But here, this other person, when he likes or loves something, obviously it's thought out with reasons behind it, and it's like, well, this thing, I love it, but for what reason do I love it? Well, it allows me to experience the blessings of Allah. I feel delight on account of which I'm able to praise Allah Azza wa Jal. It then makes me more motivated to be thankful and grateful. And so really this is a love not for the thing in and of itself, but it follows on from the love of Allah Azza wa Jal. And so now you can then extend this to all of the things that you kind of experience or that you are involved in, right? So the one that's being described here, the abd who, is in servitude to Allah, who loves only Allah and for the sake of Allah, and he combines all of these qualities, and whatever happens, he knows it's ultimately coming from Allah. This is the one who has, completed his servitude to Allah to the level that Allah has decreed for him, because not everybody is in the same level, obviously. Not everyone has the same level of knowledge, but each person whatever level of knowledge he has, he's still able to reach a level of perfection based upon that knowledge. Right, so this now, if you follow like the sequence of what Ibn Taymiyyah is discussing, essentially he's just given us like different scenarios of people that exist, different categories of people that exist in relation to worshipping Allah and seeking aid. So here, this type of person that's being described here, we'll go on to the footnotes of Shaykh al-Fawzan. Shaykh al-Fawzan says here, commenting upon like this passage, the meaning of Uboodiyyah then, فمعنى العبودية أن يعلق الإنسان أموره بالله. Servitude then, what is servitude? Really, we can explain it in a sentence, which is that all of your affairs, you attach them to Allah Azza wa Jal. All of your affairs, you attach them to Allah, meaning that your reliance and your dependence is purely upon Allah, and you relate them all back to Allah. Right, so let me just give you like a quick illustration to illustrate this. So, for example, let's just say, for argument's sake, you agree to meet somebody at a certain time, and you turn up and that person doesn't turn up. Right, so now you become angry and upset and whatever, yeah? This person is really angry and upset, and he wasn't able to fulfill whatever objective he was supposed to fulfill, and now this person is really upset and angry. Right, that's one person. Another person will be in the same situation, but he'll think, no, qadar Allah, okay, it didn't happen, so whatever Allah decreed. And even though that person is at fault, obviously that person is still to blame. You're not saying we don't blame that person. That person is still to blame. But here, this person realizes ultimately my affairs are under Allah's control, and on this occasion it just so happened that Allah didn't decree and will this thing for me to proceed. Right? So he's not like, this first person was angry with the situation. So in a way, he's kind of like finding fault with the decree of Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? That still doesn't mean that person shouldn't be blamed. He should be blamed. But here this person is kind of like, it's almost like you are angry with Allah's decree, because Allah is the one who decreed the situation. Right? But here, in this other person, his response is, okay, my affairs are ultimately controlled and determined by Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah Azza wa Jal didn't decree and will this thing for it to happen. So, tawakkal upon Allah, maybe it'll happen another way or whatever, right? In other words, like here, this person, he's tying his affairs to Allah, right? Whereas this person tied his affair to that person, which is why it's made him angry and upset, and almost in a way like, being upset with the decree of Allah Azza wa Jal. So from this simple example that I've given you, is just showing like the difference between, like, you can see this difference in people's behaviors. People behave and react in different ways. And from that you can see the difference between the person who truly is attaching his affairs, who recognizes his affairs are ultimately he ties them to Allah Azza wa Jalla and His decree, and the people who are not like that, right? So this is a good definition for ma'na al-ubudiyyah. Like, this is another way to define ubudiyyah. Who is the one who is truly in servitude to Allah? Well, he said it is that أن يعلق الإنسان أموره بالله, that a person, he attaches or relegates all of his affairs to Allah. So he says, فَعَلِّقْ أُمُورَكَ وَأَطْمَاعَكَ وَرَجَاءَكَ وَخَوْفَكَ وَمَحَبَّتَكَ بِاللَّهِ عَزَّ وَجَلَّ. So therefore you should attach all of your affairs, your hopes, your aspirations, your fear of things, your love with Allah Azza wa Jal. They should all be attached to Allah Azza wa Jal. And then he mentions the verse in the Quran, which is the command to Ibrahim alayhi salam, قُلْ إِنَّ صَلَاتِي وَنُسُكِي وَمَحْيَايَ وَمَمَاتِي لِلَّهِ رَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ لَا شَرِيكَ لَهُ وَبِذَلِكَ أُمِرْتُ وَأَنَا أَوَّلُ الْمُسْلِمِينَ. Say, indeed, my prayer, my sacrifice, my life and my death are all for Allah, the Lord of the worlds. There is no partner to him. And with that have I been commanded, and I am the first of the Muslimin, the first of those who submit. So, this is what you do, and then obviously you take the means, وَخُذْ بِالْأَسْبَابِ النَّافِئَةِ الْمُفِيدَةِ الَّتِي تُعِينُكَ عَلَى ذَلِكَ. Right? So you attach all your affairs to Allah, then you take the ways and means that will help you to attain those goals. So then, Shaykh al-Fawzan continues commenting upon this passage, and he says that the ways and means, al-asbab, the ways and means that Allah has put in His creation, you have to believe that it is Allah who placed them, and He is the one who is the placer of the causes, like He's the one who created everything and made one thing a means to another thing, right? So for example, He made water the means to life, and He made the sun as a means for other things, and He made the animals as a means for food and for clothing and garments. So everything in the creation, the ways and the means, the causes and their effects, you believe that Allah is the one who placed all of them. He's the one who created them, brought them into existence, and then you are the one who seek aid by way of these things to help you become obedient to Allah. So everything that's been made of ways and means for you in the creation, it's simply something by which you seek aid by way of it to worship Allah Azza wa Jal. So wealth is one of those means, right? Clothing is one of those means. Spouses, partners, marriage, that's another one of those means. So everything in the creation, Allah has made it as a sabab, a means, so that you can seek aid by way of it to help you to worship Allah, to obey Allah. And so this obviously is a bounty from Allah Azza wa Jalla. And that's why in the Quran, Allah reminds us of all of the bounties, of all the favors, of all of the things that we see around us, which are there to aid us in uboodiyyah, in servitude to Allah Azza wa Jalla. And then as for the point that you mentioned at the end, that a servant, he witnesses and observes that Allah is the creator of all of these ways and means, and He is the one who decreed them, and everything belongs to Allah, and He is its Lord and its owner and its creator, and that you are the one who is in need of Him, right? Shaykh al-Fawzan comments and he says that likewise a believer must believe that everything which is in the heavens and the earth, from all of the servants of Allah, from all of the creations of Allah, they are His creations. They are in His hand. He turns them whichever way He wills. Right? The believer who understands all of these things, he is the one who knows the realities. He is the one who knows his Lord. He is the one who knows the wisdom, the wisdoms in Allah's actions. And He is the one who truly understands whatever happens in this creation. Right? So in other words, what he's saying here is that if you look at people, different people will always have different interpretations of things. And, like the events that take place upon this earth. And the one who truly fathoms and understands that it is Allah who is the Lord, creator, owner, right, and everything is in His affair, and He's the one who turns things, and now let me give you another quick illustration of how this would apply. So let's say, for example, that you have right, so let's say, for example, you have these like takfiris and khawarij and ikhwanis and people like that, of that kind of orientation. And so what they would tend to say, they would tend to say, for example, that the reason why Muslims are suffering in poverty and hardship and difficulty, whether in, like, let's say, the African lands or other places, is because is because the rulers are corrupt, and the rulers are, for example, might be engaging in interest or riba, and because they listen to the West, and because they're trying to pinpoint the blame in a specific area and say it's just the rulers, right? So here, obviously, this is like their interpretation of what they think is really happening, right? So what's happening here is that this is like a very narrow-minded, very short-sighted interpretation of what's really going on. But what's really happening, there's much more taking place, right? So what's happening on a, what's truly happening on a, when we look at Allah Azza wa Jal, He is the owner, He is the wise one, and He does things for wisdoms. And then we find answers in the Sunnah. So for example, in the Sunnah we read, the Messenger mentioned that, for example, when the people cheat each other, so when you cheat me in trade and I cheat you in trade, and I sell you, 5 kilograms of potatoes, but 3 kilograms is just a rubble and soil, and then you sell me, milk, you dilute it with water, and we start cheating each other in weights and measures, right? This is what the Messenger said in an authentic hadith, that when the people they cheat in the weights and measures, then what will happen is that there will be drought, and there will be lack of provision, and then the ruler will become tyrannical upon them. So here now we're getting a slightly different picture now than the one that Takfiri and the Khariji and the Ikhwani would try to give you. For him it's just all political and the rulers, right? But what the reality of the situation is, that what's happening here is that, this is Allah's wisdom and His justice and the laws in His creation taking effect, which is that if we cheat each other in the weights and measures, then what will happen is that there's going to be consequences of that. And from those consequences is drought, right? So there'll be famines and droughts, there'll be lack of provision, and the ruler will become tyrannical upon you. So the tyranny of the ruler itself is caused by something else. There's a step before the ruler, right? So here what's happening then is that Allah Azza wa Jal is actually, it is Allah who's turning the ruler against you, the subject, because of some corruption in you, the subject. So now what you see as the ruler is a man who is actually a servant amongst the servants of Allah, whom Allah has unleashed against you. All right? So this now is a more accurate interpretation of what's actually taking place in Allah's creation. All right? So the point being that different people, based upon their different levels of knowledge and servitude to Allah and acknowledgement of these types of affairs, they will see things in different ways. That's why Shaykh al-Fawzan says here, this servant is the one who knows the reality, who knows his Lord, and who knows his wisdom in what happens in this creation. Right? And the same, to be honest with you, applies to the disbelievers in their sciences. This is like a huge topic in the modern era. The disbelievers in their sciences, when they try to study and understand Allah's creation, they are actually totally blinded by their rejection of Allah, His names, His attributes. And so when they study things, they don't see in those things like Allah's names, attributes, they don't see wisdoms, purposes, end goals. So therefore they are left to kind of reconstruct what they think is happening based upon their own theories, ideas, and they are just completely and utterly misguided in those things. Right? So it happens in terms of the creation as well. Like in fact, Shaykh al-Fawzan continues and he says, as for the one who believes that this, these creations are just, they are independent in their effect, and that everything just is happening by way of nature, by way of the properties of things, this type of person does not know Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. All he knows is the material things and their, and he thinks that these are the ones who are the causes of things, whereas in reality they are only means which Allah has created. They are not the ones who are actually, al-fa'ila, like the effective cause. They are simply means which Allah has created. It is Allah is the one who is the true cause. So anyway, the point being in all of this discussion, what Sheikh Al-Fawzan is pointing out is that the type of person who is a true servant of Allah is the one who, first of all, he loves only Allah Azza wa Jal, and for the sake of Allah Azza wa Jal. Right. Then he seeks aid from Allah, and the things that he attains and achieves and which come to him, he knows ultimately they came from Allah, not because of his skill, or because he took the means, or because he had some special knowledge, or because he knows that everything is created by Allah, and Allah is the ultimate one who causes, and every means he takes, they were decreed by Allah for him. So in other words, he witnesses the Tawheed of Allah. He knows everything comes from Allah. Allah is his Lord, Allah is his owner. And when a person thinks like this, then he is able to correctly interpret all the events which happen around him. Right? He will see them in the right way. And this is how basically, all of the problems in people's lives are basically, eliminated. If everyone in your household, in your family, whatever is thinking like this, then it eliminates a lot of the problems that happen in households and families. Coming back to this whole thing of loving for the sake of Allah, hating for the sake of Allah, being loyal and disloyal for the sake of Allah, and relying only upon Allah. This eliminates, many of the problems that people basically find themselves in. And then, in fact, let me continue on with the speech of Sheikh Al-Fawzan, because it's quite important. So, obviously, he's now explained to us that the servant who sees things in the right way, who will have the correct interpretation of things. And then he says that everything in the heavens and the earth is a creation of Allah. They are his servants. Allah is the one who kind of turns them and controls them, and he either subjects them to your use so that these means and these ways serve you and benefit you, or he can unleash them against you if you are someone who deserves punishment, or if you disobey him. Right? In other words, Allah Azza wa Jal is the one who can unleash his own creatures against you. And then he mentions the verse in the Quran, وَلِلَّهِ جُنُودُ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. To Allah belong the junud. Junud meaning here, like the servants, or the soldiers, or the hosts, or whatever armies. Like Allah has, from his creatures, he has so many things that he can turn them against his servants. Whether like the winds, Allah can unleash the winds as he did against some nations of the past. Allah can unleash frogs like he did with the animals, like he did with Fir'aun. Allah can unleash the oceans if he wants. Right? Allah can unleash elephants if he wants. But all of these are from the creatures of Allah, and even from his own slaves, like he unleashed the Mongols against the Muslims from the east, or he unleashed the Crusaders from the west over the Muslims, or like he unleashed the European colonialists against the Muslim lands, like in the 16th, 17th, 18th centuries. They are all, even these disbelievers, they are the servants of Allah, like in terms of the universal sense, like we discussed before, right? They are still Allah's servants. He unleashes them against whoever he wills. And likewise, the rulers, he can unleash them against the subjects he can unleash them against the rulers. Right? A wife against the husband against the wife, the children against the parents against the children, or anything and everything. All of these are the hosts, the soldiers, the things that Allah can mobilize against whomever he wills, for whatever reason, for his wisdom. Right? So Shaykh Al-Fawzan says, so Allah unleashes these creations against you, and everything is in the hand of Allah Azza wa Jal. Tabarakalladhi biyadihi al-mulk wa huwa ala kulli shayin qadir. Blessed be the one in whose hand is the dominion, and he has power and control over every single thing. So everything is in the hand of Allah. So once you know and understand this, why are you turning to other than Allah? Why should you turn to other than? Why should you be in need of other than Allah? Why do you request things from other than Allah in a way that you depend upon them and your heart is attached to them? How can this be? Right? So you should know that everything is in Allah's hand, and everything is in obedience to Allah, whether it is done willingly or by compulsion, because even the kuffar and the shayateen, in whatever they do, they are ultimately under Allah's universal will, right? Even though they're upon disbelief, nevertheless, they cannot escape outside of what Allah has willed for them. So basically they are obeying the decrees of Allah. Whatever Allah has decreed for them, they are obedient to those decrees. So in that respect, they are obeying Allah in the universal sense. But obviously they are disobeying Allah when it comes to their disbelief and everything else. So as the Shaykh says, they are still His servants. So the disbelievers are His servants. Like Fir'aun as a disbeliever, he is still a slave of Allah who is doing whatever Allah decreed for him to do, even though he is an arrogant disbeliever, right? He's just simply obeying the creational laws of Allah Azza wa Jal. So even the shayateen, the devils, they obey the decrees of Allah with respect to them, because they are also Allah's creatures, Allah's slaves, right? So here disobedience is like by way of Allah's creational laws that they are obeying Him. وَلَهُ أَسْلَمَ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ طَوْءًا وَكَرْهًا وَإِلَيْهِ يُرْجَعُونَ. To Him submits everything in the heavens and the earth, whether willingly or unwillingly, and to Him will they be returned. As for the believer, he out of choice, he obeys Allah Azza wa Jal. Right? So everything in the creation, whether there's jinn, shayateen, men, believers, disbelievers, they are all in the hand of Allah, and they obey Him, like they follow His creational law. لَهُ مَا فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ كُلٌّ لَهُ قَانِتُونَ. To Allah belongs what is in the heavens and the earth, and everything is in submission, is in submission to Him. So then Shaykh al-Fawzan finishes by saying that, when a person knows all of this and he understands all these things, and that Allah is the Lord, the regulator, the controller, and then he worships Allah and he, establishes servitude to Allah, then this will be in accordance with the level of knowledge that he specifically has, right? Because each person's knowledge is different, right? So for example, according to my level of knowledge, I can reach a level of completion and perfection. But then there's another person who has, more level of knowledge, and he reaches his level of perfection. So everyone's actually different. And this is something that Allah has decreed. He's divided everything for each person. So He's decreed for you, whatever is your level of uboodiyyah, right? So Allah is the one who distributes all of this. Allah is the one who decrees and determines all of this. Everything is in Allah's control. He apportions everything, piety, righteousness, uboodiyyah, to different servants, different levels according to His wisdom. So anyway, that's the end of the commentary of Shaykh al-Fawzan. We will finish on this point. So really, what we've discussed today really is this section. We've outlined and highlighted 3 more categories of people, right, in relation to uboodiyyah. Last week we mentioned the person, who he doesn't seek servitude, but nevertheless he's aided in the worldly affairs. This person, is ruined, and he hasn't really established the kalima la ilaha illallah. Then we have another person who wants to be, in servitude to Allah, but he's not seeking aid and assistance from Allah, not relying upon Him, so he will not achieve his objective. And then you have another person who basically, he actually turns to other than Allah and seeks help from other than Allah, right? And this will be a ruin upon him, because other than Allah cannot aid him or help him in any way, right? So he goes in that direction. And so this you find often like with the people of shirk, the people of bid'ah, like the Sufis and people like that, they and also, there's different categories, I guess. And then fourthly, you have the perfect situation of a servant who seeks Allah and who relies upon Him, And, in doing so, he knows everything is under the control, the will of Allah Azza wa Jal. Whatever happens to him, comes to him through the asbab, through the ways and means. It's not because of those ways and means, it's because of the creator of those ways and means. So his heart and all of his affairs are always attached only to Allah and to nothing else. There isn't any attachments to anything else. Right? So this goes back to what we mentioned before at the beginning, that the heart can have attachments to things, to, lust, to wealth, to authority, to power, to luxury, to things that a heart becomes attached to. The more you have these attachments, the more you're going to be put to trial, the more you're compromising your servitude to Allah Azza wa Jal, and the more trials and tribulations there will be in your life. Right? So here we end by describing the perfect type of abd, the perfect type of person, and the way he thinks and the way he behaves, and the way he actualizes the ubudiyyah to Allah. So we'll stop on that point. In the next lesson, Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, he just simply discusses how the people have different variations, they have different levels in this issue of ubudiyyah, and in ibadah, and in isti'anah, and in tawakkul, right? They all vary, and so therefore you have different ranges amongst people, in respect to this topic. So we'll stop there, inshallah. We'll continue next week. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Wa sallallahu ala nabina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.